Joe Biden gave a speech in Pennsylvania, and let me tell you, I don't know what's gotten into him, honestly. I don't know if it's the political winds. I don't know if it's something that happened when he got COVID, if they started putting something in his water differently or in his coffee. But he is a different man than he's been most of his presidency. It's freaking me out. He is so much more energetic. In the speeches we've seen recently in rallies, much sharper, which, as all of us are well aware and concerned with, it seems like very significant changes have happened over the last few years in his ability to effectively communicate, especially in speech settings. And so watching these rallies have been confusing me over the last week or so, because he is just so much more motivated, so much more sharp, so much more effective in the points that he's trying to make. And it's interesting. So we're going to look at a few things here. We have lots to go through from this one speech that was kind of centered around police and fighting gun crime and stuff like that. And so you'll see a lot of the messaging is centered around that. But as I said, we have lots to go through. So let's start off with him addressing directly Lindsey Graham's comments about wanting to let people know there's going to be riots in the streets if Trump gets indicted. And so there's kind of this weird thing we're seeing on the right where they're not saying they want their followers to riot, but they're saying if you indict Trump, they are going to riot. So you make the decision, right? Which is obviously very dangerous. So here's Biden's response to that.
We are the United States of America.
And I left in kind of a beginning part that is before he gets to that point, just to show you the energy that he has that's so different than usual.
And when we are united, there is not a single thing we cannot do. Not a single thing.
Give it to me, Joe.
I mean it. So, folks, let's remember who in God's name we are. I really mean it. What our values are. Mm-hmm. What we believe. We the people. That's how our Constitution starts, or the Declaration. We the people. It's who we are. And by the way, no one expects politics to be a patty cake.
So here's towards Lindsey.
It sometimes gets mean as hell. But the idea, you turn on the television and see senior senators and congressmen saying, if such and such happens, there'll be blood in the street. Where the hell are we? Well, that's all I'm looking for. And folks, do me a favor.
And then he goes on to ask them to vote for the candidate he's there stumping for. So again, much more energy. He made that point effectively. He connected kind of the thought of we're the United States and we should hold ourselves to a certain, bar. Whether or not we've lived up to that in the past is obviously not what I'm addressing here. I'm just saying I do think it's impactful to say we should live up to the promise that we hope to make, the promise that ideally we would be making as a country, as the most powerful country on the planet. And so we shouldn't be dealing with a situation where, as he said, senior senators, Lindsey Graham, making comments that's very obviously promoting violence in an attempt to, threaten law enforcement out of properly holding Trump accountable. That's the goal of saying something like that. So here is now Biden talking about how you cannot say you're for law enforcement, as the right often does, and again, this is a law enforcement focused event. You can see in the background there's some police officers and kind of talking about gun violence a lot and stuff like that, addressing crime. And so he's saying, listen, Republicans, you can't pretend that you're pro law and order, pro law enforcement, back the blue, if you're also supporting January 6th rioters who were beating police officers, right? So we've talked about that on this show, but here's Biden addressing that.
So let me say this to my MAGA Republican friends in Congress. Don't tell me you support law enforcement if you won't condemn what happened on the 6th. Don't tell me. Can't do it. For God's sake, whose side are you on? Whose side are you on? Look, you're either on the side of a mob or the side of the police. You can't be pro-law enforcement and pro-insurrection. You can't be a party of law and order and call the people who attacked the police on January 6th patriots. You can't do it. What are we teaching our children? It's just that simple. And now it's sickening to see the new attacks on the FBI, threatening the life of law enforcement agents and their families for simply carrying out the law and doing their job. Look, I want to say this as clear as I can. There's no place in this country, no place, for endangering the lives of law enforcement. No place. None, never, period.
Guys, we can get deeper into, at a different time, what is the balance between, as we're about to talk about with this upcoming clip, you know, an emphasis on law enforcement and doing the proper things to train them, and also what reforms need to be done. Where does the conversation kind of balance out there, and all of those things. But the energy and concise nature of the speeches he's making recently is unrecognizable. Who is this guy? What's happening? Honestly. Okay, so then lastly, he says something he said before, which the actual word for word meat of it I agree with, which is the solution to the issues we have with law enforcement isn't to defund them. And whether or not you agree with me, don't really care. That's my stance. And Biden says a similar thing. I would probably, if I was a part of his team, adjust the way that he gives these types of kind of deliveries, because I think you can say the points that you want to make about law enforcement, about police reform, without necessarily making it so clear that you're antagonizing a particular part of your party, because whether you like it or not, there is a part of the Democratic Party that doesn't want to hear what we're about to see Biden say. And so I'll discuss further, and we'll show a little clip of a CNN contributor responding to this.
You know, I call it the Safer America's plan, and both your members of Congress voted for it. It's based on a simple notion. When it comes to public safety in this nation, the answer is not defund the police, it's fund the police. Fund the police. And give them, we expect them to do everything. We expect them to protect us, to be psychologists, and to be sociologists. I mean, we expect you to do everything. I'm not joking. Everything. You realize more police officers are killed dealing with domestic violence than anything else? You realize that?
So for our podcast listeners, just to give you an image, he's kind of has a mic in his hand. And he's just walking around the stage. So this is very unscripted. I'm sure at some point or at some spot in the front of the stage or something, he has notes or even possibly a teleprompter, which is totally great. But it's fascinating to see in this more relaxed environment where he can take the mic and walk around and kind of get close to the crowd. He does better than when he's at a podium giving a speech, reading off the teleprompters. It's very interesting.
Point is, we ask so much of you, so much of you. I've not met a cop who likes a bad cop.
Okay, so my point on that is, because the slogan defund the police, I do think did damage to the Democratic Party. And if you associate yourself with a slogan that for a lot of, I would say, regular, moderate-ish voters, just really sounds crazy and scary. You're not hearing, when you hear the phrase defund the police, reform / reallocate funds so that it's mental health professionals dealing with certain situations whenever police deal with them incorrectly. You don't hear that. All you hear is like, make the police less funded and resourced in their ability to respond to things. And so I see a situation where police are not doing the job that they could do. And the solution to that being just extracting resources from all the departments doesn't make much sense in my head. Now, in some cities that have overly bloated budgets, that might be the solution. But as far as like an across the board, here's a solution, that's not going to be something that fixes the problems that we all identify. And so that kind of carries me to my critique of his statement there. I think if you're going to make that hard, aggressive statement against a part of your party, which is fair to make, sometimes you want to distance yourselves from parts that you think are harmful, you need to follow it up with recognizing the real issues that they're responding to. Does that make sense? So like, you can say the solution is not to defund the police. I think that's fair. You could even say the exact same phrase, not defund, but fund. But he always, I've seen it multiple times. He did it in his State of the Union too. Leaves it at that. And if you just leave it at that, it sounds like you're completely invalidating the very real issues that the defund the police movement was responding to. Again, incorrectly responding to as far as what they're prescribing, but what they're describing was largely, something we should be concerned with. And so I think the broken nature of our police departments and the way they function, and as he was identifying, how we expect police to deal with mental health crises, domestic violence stuff, when there needs to be maybe police there, but then also someone who's more knowledgeable about how that can be resolved, more social worker, mental health professionals, stuff like that. And so there's lots that can be done, better, more extensive processes to make sure we're getting good police officers. They're trained properly. They're held accountable properly. Every single one of them has a body camera. A lot of things should be done. Absolutely. Massive reform, of course. But the solution isn't the one that was proposed by that particular movement. It's fine for him to identify that as long as what he didn't do is follow it up with, but here's the problems I recognize are there, and here's how I hope to solve them. Because when you just leave it at a kind of denunciation of the movement without recognizing the legitimate parts of their voices and making it clear that you heard them, even if you disagree with them, I think is the wrong move on his part. Or I think I said that correctly. I would implore him to make it clear he's hearing them. Okay, so here's a CNN contributor. I know we're going along on this segment, but I think it's important, who's responding pretty much to that moment, or to Biden leaning into kind of the law and order thing in this rally and saying it's kind of a balancing act.
So I think that is what they're trying to recreate. But we should be clear. This is not going to be a sense where...
So this isn't the one that we're watching, but he's setting up the woman we're about to see talk.
Where Democrats are suddenly in the driver's seat of midterm elections. That is not what we see out there. Republicans are still at this point projected to take back the House if you look race by race, but not by as big of a margin. But what he's trying to do is sort of, essentially refire up the Biden versus Trump rhetoric, which is why he did that speech in Pennsylvania. He's going back to Pennsylvania tomorrow. He's going back to Pennsylvania on Monday. That is ground zero for all of this.
I think that President Biden, though, and Democrats have to weigh how much they want to center this law and order message. I get it. They want to be on offense on this issue and not constantly being beat up on the issue on the right. But at the same time, they run the risk of alienating some of their voters, right? They are not going to get the, so-called back the blue folks. They're just not going to get those voters. And I think speeches like this are an appeal to try to call in that group. But at the same time, there is a reform-minded wing of the Democratic Party. And so he has to strike the right balance, I think, in these speeches and not doing too much to distance himself from those folks as well.
Totally agree with her analysis there. Here's what I think they should continue to heavily lean into. That was a failure. The hypocrisy of the right wing on law enforcement. That's great because they are so hypocritical, pretending to be back the blue people until the FBI is investigating their guy and then threaten the lives of FBI. They're horrible. They're corrupt. It's a whole conspiracy. And so that, I say 7 days a week, scream about it. All I would adjust is maybe the magnitude of the conversation around law and order, because I agree with her. While it's an important topic, how do we lower crime? How do we do all these things? How do we reform the police? It's not necessarily, at least in the lead up to a midterm, the biggest winning issue for Democrats, because the people who really resonate with the back the blue law and order messaging aren't going to go for Democrats anyways. So instead, do what I was proposing earlier, which is talk about both within the same conversation. Here's the reforms we need to do to the police, and here's how we need to support the process of law enforcement doing what they should be doing and all of those things. And of course, denounce all of the horrible attacks from the right wing against law enforcement recently. So that would be my kind of response to that. But overall, I would say good moments from Joe Biden, at least in the way he's now appearing, the way that he's presenting himself, how sharp he is in these recent rallies. Again, unrecognizable, versus a few months ago, versus most of his presidency. It's really crazy.